Welcome to the Cheating Stories channel. We hope you enjoy today's story. What does your family mean to you? Are they just convenient people you have around, or do you genuinely love them? Do you dream mainly for yourself, while others just fill in the gaps of your life? Is your work your main priority, while your family is more like a hobby? I've asked a lot of questions that need answers. Some of you will need to think deeply about this before you can honestly express your opinions. Others might respond quickly, but they know they're lying to themselves. And then there are people like me who will readily say that family comes first. My children and grandchildren are everything to me. They are my sun, moon, and stars. I would give them my last shirt without hesitation or even my last dollar for their slightest whim. I would happily live with only the basics so they could enjoy luxury. You might notice that I haven't mentioned my wife. 20 years ago, I had a wife. No, she isn't dead, at least not physically. We didn't get divorced because it would have upset our children. We continued to live in the same house under the same conditions we have had for over 40 years. The children know nothing about the distance between my wife and me, and more importantly, she doesn't know either. You might think I'm talking nonsense, but I still love my family, just not my wife, and pretend everything is fine. Why would a rational person do that? All three of my children love their mother, and telling them what is deeply imprinted in my mind would lessen her in their eyes. I love them too much to hurt their happiness in any way, even at my own expense. You might want to call me weak or a coward, but it's nonsense. For the past 20 years, I've been protecting my children. It has been harder than you can imagine, more difficult than any torture ever devised by man. My name is Charlie, and I have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. They mean the world to me. My oldest, Rob, will soon be 40, Billy is 37, and my little girl Judy just turned 33. Thanks to them, I have 8 wonderful grandchildren, and I would gladly give my life for any of them. I have kept a secret inside me for almost 20 years. The woman who was once my life and only love is Sally. I'm telling you this now because I have only a few days or hours left. The doctor says it won't be painful. Sally and I once had what you'd call an ideal marriage. We met right after college. I had a great job as an up-and-coming architect, and Sally was in real estate, which she loved. I first saw her in a restaurant, and it was love at first sight for me. Looking back, I realize it took her a bit longer to say she loved me. I asked her out to a movie, which was how it was done back then. We dated for a few months, and I finally gathered the courage to ask her to marry me. We got married 6 months later at the church her family attended. Hawaii was where we spent our honeymoon and discovered the physical side of our love for each other. We spent a wonderful week in the sun, exploring each other for hours. Our life as newlyweds was happy. We worked hard to save money for a house and loved each other deeply. Sally was excellent at her job and found us a beautiful home that we could barely afford. We bought it with difficulty, promising to work harder and cut unnecessary expenses. We stopped eating out and started bringing our lunches to work. I worked harder than ever before in my life, and it paid off quickly. Soon, I was promoted, and we could easily afford the house. When we first bought the house, we spent time together doing things that didn't require spending money, like taking long walks and having picnics. We enjoyed this time so much that we continued living modestly and spending time together, even later enjoying each other's company. The money we earned went into the house, and we worked hard to make it a beautiful place where we could raise our family and grow old together. The day Sally told me she was expecting our first child, I couldn't have been happier or prouder. All my prayers were answered. As Sally's belly grew each day, so did my love for her. We continued living as we had, preferring to spend time rather than money on our children and ourselves. Don't get me wrong, we had everything we needed. We just felt it was more important to do things together as a family than to have all the latest toys for the kids. By doing almost everything as a team, we tried to instill family values in our children, teaching them right from wrong in our own way, with love. Church was a big part of our lives, not because we were fanatics but because we wanted the children to believe in a higher power. We attended services every Sunday as a family and participated in all the walks and picnics. Our life was happy. At 43, I was injured on a construction site while inspecting a building we were working on. A falling steel beam hit me, crushing my back. The doctors put me back together, and I spent more than 3 months in the hospital, praying daily to recover and provide for my family. It took a long time to learn to walk and move independently again. The pain was terrible, so I took a lot of painkillers. Eventually, I got used to the pain or it subsided, and I weaned myself off the painkillers. I used a mild muscle relaxant for relief most of the time and could function normally, so I returned to work. My family life was relatively normal, considering my physical limitations. The only problem was that the medication made me impotent. Sex with my wife had always been, and I mean always, wonderful and frequent. It was one of the things we discovered early in our marriage that we could do to entertain ourselves for free when facing financial difficulties. We loved each other and enjoyed an active sex life until my unfortunate accident. The only positive outcome of my work injury was the large settlement check we received. My children's education was secured, and I had enough money left for early retirement. The money wasn't as important as my health, but over time, it seemed to return. Our life got back on track. I could keep up with work and my family. Everything fell into place except for sex with my wife. It's been more than a year since we last made love. Imagine going from 5 or more times a week to 0. It must have been very hard for Sally, but it wasn't easy for me either. I was not only pressured by being celibate but also by the guilt of not being able to please my wife, which tore me apart. Unfortunately, all the doctors told me that my condition wouldn't improve as long as I continued taking the medication. One day, I decided to stop taking the pills. I didn't tell Sally because she wouldn't have agreed. She always told me that my health was the most important thing. Based on past experience, it would take some time for the chemicals to fully leave my system. My company sent me to Toronto for a week of meetings about a new building we were designing. I left early Sunday morning and planned to be home by the following Saturday afternoon. By Monday, I felt the muscles in my lower back starting to twitch. This was a good sign that the medication's effects were wearing off. Despite the spasms, my meetings went well. I called home every evening to talk to my wife and kids, just as I usually did when traveling for work. These conversations never contained anything new, just the usual talk about school and how much we missed each other. Routine things, but I enjoyed hearing all the details of my family's life. On Thursday morning, I woke up feeling physically aroused, a sign that the medication's effects were fading. Despite my back pain, I didn't care if it meant I was back to my old self. My meetings concluded that evening, a day earlier than expected. I was too excited to stay another minute, so I changed my flight reservation and planned to be home the next morning around 11 o'clock. All the kids would be at school, and Sally and I could spend the day together. On my way home, I thanked God for making me whole again. I took a taxi from the airport, and traffic was light, so I got home around 10:30. My anticipation was at its peak when I entered our house. You can probably guess what happened next, and you'd be right. I experienced the greatest shock of my life when I quietly went upstairs to surprise Sally. I found our church's reverend in bed with her. Watching the pastor with Sally was the death sentence for our love. There can be no worse feeling than what I experienced at that moment. I wanted to rush in and confront them both, but I couldn't bear it any longer and backed out of the bedroom. The shock of seeing my wife of 20 years with another man nearly killed me. My first thought was about the children and how they would handle this knowledge. This thought hit me so hard that I decided to quietly leave the house to think things through. I booked a hotel room for the night. Two things immediately came to mind. There was no longer any love for the woman I had married, and I had lost my faith in God. Look at what that heartless man did to me. To hell with Sally, to hell with God, and to hell with his messenger. My mind was in turmoil, but I had to decide what to do. If I divorced Sally, the children would find out about their mother's actions. Was that the best solution? No, their happiness meant more to me than anything in the world. I couldn't do that to them. I already knew what she had done, so nothing could change that now. It was my burden to bear, and no one else would share my sorrow. Of course, Sally knew what she had done, but would she feel guilty? Would she confess her infidelity and ask for forgiveness? The emotions that led her to break her vows would likely prevent her from risking telling me. She knew well how I felt about marital betrayal. The next day, when I returned to the house, I was overwhelmed with a sense of loneliness. I had decided to stay married to a woman whose sight I could no longer bear. It had to be an Oscar-worthy performance. I didn't need to pretend to be tired when I got home. I hadn't slept a wink the previous night. I kissed Sally on the cheek and asked if it would be okay to talk later. I went to my den, closed the door, and stayed there in solitude until dinner. At dinner, my mood was very subdued. I tried to pay attention to what the kids were saying and answered all their questions about Toronto. That night, I told Sally that while in Toronto, I discovered I felt much better if I slept in a chair. My recliner was downstairs in my den, so I spent the night there, never intending to sleep in her bed again. The next morning was Sunday, and we all went to church as usual. I hadn't forgotten the other participant in the betrayal that ruined my life and planned to make sure he knew it was over. That day, my family sat in the front pew, although we usually sat somewhere in the middle. I stared intently at the preacher for the entire hour while we listened to his sermon. Sweat was rolling down his smug forehead, and he didn't meet my eyes the whole time we were there. I made sure we were the last to leave the chapel that day because I wanted to be the last person to shake his hand. When my turn came, I gripped his hand with an ironclad hold and continued to squeeze as he winced in obvious pain. I leaned in and whispered, "Never come within sight of my family again, or I will nail you to the cross above the altar and burn this damn house of God to the ground." The shock on his face told me he heard my words loud and clear. He knew I meant every word I said. The preacher packed up and left town before the week was over. I resumed taking my medication. My heart was already suffering, so there was no need to endure the back pain as well. Besides, being physically functional was no longer necessary. Sally tried a few times to please me, but what I felt for her now brought no benefit. I'm sure she noticed something had changed between us, but perhaps she just attributed it to my guilt over not being able to perform in bed. You might think it would be impossible to live in the same house with someone you no longer loved. I agree with you, it was difficult but not impossible. If you do it long enough and think about it hard enough, you can find a solution for any situation. Additionally, my medical issues had an advantage. You can use fatigue and pain to resolve many situations. I remembered all the special days, like anniversaries and birthdays, and always left a little note at the bottom of the card. Sally asked me once, after reading her card, what those letters meant. I told her it stood for, "Yours forever, Charlie," but in truth, it meant, "You're a dirty liar." In all the years since Sally cheated on me, I never slept in the same room with her. I only returned to church for my children's weddings, telling Sally that the wooden pews were too hard to sit on for long periods. I never told anyone the secret I kept inside for the last 20 years. All of this was done out of the only love I had left, and it was all for my children. Right now, I only have a few minutes left to live. I can feel it. My family is gathered around me. For the most part, I lived a good life. I saw all my children graduate from college and start their own families. They all grew up and are living happy lives. That alone is enough for me to go to my grave a happy man. Once or twice over the years, I thought about getting a divorce. Sally cheated on me. It was a deliberate act of betrayal that I never forgave and never will forgive. During the first 20 years of our life together, I gave her all the love a man should give. For the last 20 years, I was simply the man Sally once married. My body lived in the same house we had worked so hard for, but my mind and heart were somewhere in the past. I never found out if Sally cheated on me more than once. It truly didn't matter. The results would have been the same in any case. My children would have lost respect for one of us if they had learned the truth about what Sally did. They would have hated what their mother did but likely would have wanted me to give her another chance. As much as I love them, I would not have given her that chance. The pain and humiliation were too deep. Their wishes would have been rejected, and my family would have fallen apart. I chose the path, right or wrong, to keep the family unit intact and strong. The children's mother and I could be loved and respected equally by them. Saying goodbye to my children for the last time is very hard and sad. I told each of them how much I loved them and how proud I truly was of them. I hugged and kissed them all goodbye and asked them to give me a little time alone with their mother. While there was still time, there was much I still needed to say to my so-called wife. Time was running out, and I was growing weaker by the minute. Over the last few weeks, I had made a decision regarding my little secret. "Sally, please come closer. It's becoming very hard for me to speak." She moved her chair closer to the bed. "Don't try to talk, dear, you need to rest." "No, Sally, there is something very important to me that you need to know. For 20 years, you were my wife, my beloved, and my best friend." "Oh, Charlie, you know we've been married for 40 years, not 20. "That's right. And for the first 20 years, you were all that and more to me. But for the last 20 years, you've been just another cheater who cheated on her husband," I said. You You knew. Yes, I came home early from that business trip to Toronto. I saw you. It's still hard for me to think about that day. Please, Charlie, forgive me. I don't want you to meet your maker this way. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. To hell with your God, I said as loudly as I could. Charlie, no, please don't do this to me. Let me explain. I beg you, Charlie. It was just a moment of weakness. Please forgive me, I beg you, Sally. I kept the secret locked inside all these years. I never spoke of it to spare the children. Now it's your secret to live with, and I hope you live to a very old age. Charlie, please, you have to forgive me before you die. Don't do this to me. If I ever meant anything to you, please, Charlie, please, she whispered through her tears. Sally, one last thing. Now that I don't have to be nice to you anymore, could you please get the hell out of my sight? I groaned with my last breath.